The room was filled with soft music and low voices, the kind of place where every glass shined and every detail spoke of money. The event was held in a grand hall of a luxury hotel, the type where even the air felt expensive. People arrived in tailored suits and elegant dresses, carrying confidence as if it were another accessory. Laughter floated easily between small groups, and introductions were made with practiced smiles. This was a place where status mattered, where people measured one another in seconds. Near the entrance stood a man who did not fit into the picture. He wore simple clothes, clean but plain, nothing that caught the eye. His shoes were worn, not dirty, just old. He stood quietly. Haith's quiet man's actions that evening had left a mark on everyone who had been present, but few could yet fully explain the impact. People continued to discuss what had happened, their conversations tinged with curiosity and admiration. Some whispered about his calm confidence, others about his knowledge. But nearly all agreed on one thing. He had changed the room simply by being himself. His presence had shifted attention from status and wealth to skill, patience, and humility. And that shift lingered even as the event came to a close. The billionaire, who had once commanded the room effortlessly, now stood somewhat apart. Observing the quiet man with a mixture of respect and reflection, he had underestimated him, mocked him, and assumed that appearances alone defined a person's worth. Yet here was someone who had quietly solved complex problems, guided others with calm authority, and gained respect without ever raising his voice. The billionaire could no longer ignore the lesson that had unfolded before him. It was one that he would remember long after the night ended. Influence and respect are earned through competence and character, not through arrogance or wealth. The quiet man, having completed what was necessary, did not linger for applause or attention. He walked through the room with the same calm, deliberate pace that had defined him all evening. Some guests tried to approach him, hoping to speak, to understand, or perhaps to simply express admiration. He greeted each with politeness and humility, never turning anyone away, but never allowing himself to become the center of attention. His actions were deliberate and measured, reflecting a lifetime of experience and a deep understanding of how to navigate complex situations without arrogance. As he moved toward the exit, people whispered among themselves. Some were awed by his calm demeanor, others by his knowledge and problem-solving ability. A few admitted to feeling embarrassed for having judged him too quickly. They had assumed that someone so quiet, so modest in appearance, could not possibly command the respect or skill they had witnessed. The evening had revealed a truth that could not be ignored. Appearances were deceiving, and true ability often lay hidden beneath the surface. The billionaire followed quietly, his mind working to process what had happened. He had tried to assert dominance through laughter, status, and wealth. But those tools had failed him in the face of competence and humility. He realized that the quiet man's calm presence had achieved what no amount of wealth or influence could. Respect that was genuine, it's not demanded. For the first time, the billionaire understood that character and skill could outweigh power and status, and that underestimating someone based on appearance or quietness could be a grave mistake. Back in the crowd, guests continued to exchange glances and whispers. People who had once laughed now spoke with admiration, discussing how the quiet man had handled the evening's challenges with composure and insight. They noted how he had solved problems that others could not, guided organizers without demanding authority, and earned respect quietly, effortlessly. The lesson was clear: patience, humility, and competence could leave a far stronger impression than loud words, flashy displays, or wealth. As the quiet man reached the exit, a few people gathered nearby, hoping to say something before he left. They asked about his experiences, how he had developed such insight, and what had allowed him to act so decisively under pressure. He answered each question calmly, clearly, and thoughtfully. He spoke of years of observing, learning, and practicing his skills, of facing challenges and making mistakes, of understanding that true competence is built through patience, effort, and reflection. Every word carried weight not because of showmanship, but because it came from experience and sincerity. The guests listened intently, realizing that what they had witnessed was rare. They had seen someone transform perceptions without aggression, without wealth, without display. They had observed a man whose actions spoke louder than words, whose humility magnified the impact of his skills, and whose calm presence had shifted attention and respect towards substance rather than appearances. It was a powerful lesson that would linger with them long after the night had ended. The billionaire finally approached him directly. There was a pause, a moment in which both men acknowledged the evening's events without words. The billionaire's expression had softened. He extended a hand, not in superiority, but in recognition. "You were right," he said quietly. "I underestimated you, and I see now how wrong I was. I respect the way you handled everything tonight." The quiet man accepted the handshake with a nod and a polite smile. He did not boast or respond with pride. Instead, he spoke simply, "Thank you. I only did what I could to help." That's all anyone can do, his words, like his actions, carried humility and sincerity, leaving a lasting impression on the billionaire and everyone nearby. The rest of the guests watched the exchange, some feeling a sense of awe, others quietly reflecting on their own assumptions and judgments. The evening had demonstrated a truth that was often overlooked. True respect is earned, not demanded. Influence is created through action, not status. And character reveals itself in how a person handles challenges. It's not in how loudly they proclaim their worth. As the quiet man left the building, the night air welcomed him. He walked without hurry, without seeking recognition, his presence calm and unassuming. Behind him, the guests continued to discuss what had happened. The story of the quiet man who had transformed the evening, becoming a topic of admiration and reflection. The billionaire, too, carried a new understanding, one that tempered his confidence with humility and respect. The quiet man's journey did not end with that night. His actions had demonstrated that even in a world obsessed with wealth, appearance, and status, true competence and character cannot be hidden. People began to understand that those who quietly act with patience, skill, and humility often achieve results far more lasting and meaningful than those who rely on showmanship or power. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of the quiet man spread. Guests spoke of him in meetings, casual conversations, and private reflections. They recalled the calm way he had solved problems, the humility with which he had guided others, and the quiet confidence that had left everyone in awe. People began to reflect on their own assumptions, recognizing how easy it is to judge someone based on appearance or demeanor, and how often true talent is overlooked. The billionaire, for his part, continued to think about the lessons he had learned. He had been humbled, forced to confront his own assumptions and arrogance. The experience reshaped the way he approached people and situations. He realized that influence and success were not only about wealth, power, or status, but also about listening, observing, and acknowledging the strengths of others, regardless of their appearance or background. Meanwhile, the quiet man remained as he always had, humble, grounded, and focused on what mattered. He did not seek fame or recognition. He understood the power of his actions, the respect they had earned, and the lessons they had taught, but he carried them quietly. His impact was felt not because he demanded it, but because he had demonstrated through calm presence and skillful action what true character looks like. Over time, people continued to share stories of the evening, of the quiet man who had quietly solved problems, guided others, and left a lasting impression without raising his voice or demanding attention. They spoke of his humility, his patience, and his competence. They remembered how he had earned respect in a room full of wealth and status, proving that influence is measured not by what one has, but by what one does. The lessons of that night remained vivid for those who had witnessed them. They realized that ridicule and assumptions can easily mislead, that appearances are often deceiving, and that patience, skill, and humility can reveal a person's true worth more clearly than any display of power. The quiet man's example inspired reflection, respect, a deeper understanding of how true character is revealed. Even long after the event ended, his impact endured. People remembered the calm presence, the steady voice, the clear actions, and the humility that defined him. The quiet man had demonstrated something rare, that one could earn genuine respect and admiration without arrogance, without seeking attention, and without relying on wealth or status. He had shown, in a simple yet profound way, that true greatness is revealed through action, patience, and character. And as the world continued carrying on with its routines and priorities, the story of that quiet man remained. It reminded those who had witnessed it that influence is earned through competence, respect is gained through humility, and true skill speaks louder than words or appearances ever could. It was a lesson that would remain with them forever, quietly shaping the way they saw others, and perhaps the way they saw themselves. Nes folded in front of him, observing the room rather than trying to enter any conversation. He had arrived alone and spoke to no one. If someone passed by him, they barely noticed him, and if they did, their eyes moved on quickly. He was invited, though few would believe it by looking at him. His name was on the list, printed clearly, but no one bothered to check. To most people there, he looked like someone who had wandered in by mistake. A staff member glanced at him once, hesitated, then decided not to ask questions. He did not cause trouble, and he did not demand attention. Across the room, surrounded by a circle of admirers, stood a billionaire known for his sharp tongue and louder opinions. He was a man used to being heard. When he spoke, others listened, not always because they agreed, but because his words carried power. He enjoyed being the center of attention and had little patience for those he believed were beneath him. His laughter was confident, sometimes careless, and often unkind. As he scanned the room, his eyes landed on the quiet man near the entrance. At first, he simply stared, curiosity mixed with disbelief. He leaned toward one of his companions and whispered something, then laughed. The laughter grew louder, pulling attention from those nearby. A few people turned to see what was so amusing. The billionaire raised his voice just enough to be heard by the group around him. He made a comment about how open the guest list must be if anyone could walk in off the street. The words were wrapped in humor, but the message was clear. Some people laughed, some smiled nervously, and others looked away. Uncomfortable but unwilling to speak up, the quiet man heard the laughter. He understood what it meant. He felt the familiar weight of judgment settle on his shoulders, something he had known many times before. For a brief moment, his eyes lowered, not in shame, but in thought. He took a slow breath and remained where he was. The billionaire noticed that the man did not react. That only encouraged him. He added another remark, louder this time, asking if the man was waiting for leftovers or hoping to clean tables later. The words cut through the room. Laughter followed again, sharper now. A few heads turned fully toward the quiet man. The silence that followed felt heavy. Everyone waited for a reaction. Some expected anger, others embarrassment. A few hoped the man would leave quietly, sparing them the discomfort. But he did not move. He stood still, calm, his face unreadable. He did not defend himself, nor did he argue. He simply looked at the billionaire for a brief moment, nodded politely, and then looked away. That reaction confused some people. It did not fit the story they had already written about him in their minds. If he were truly out of place, wouldn't he be upset? Wouldn't he rush to explain or disappear? Instead, he remained steady, as if the words had passed through him without leaving a mark. The billionaire felt a slight irritation. He was used to reactions. He thrived on them. The lack of response felt like a challenge, though he could not explain why. He shrugged it off and turned back to his group, continuing his conversation as if nothing had happened. Time passed. Drinks were served. Conversation shifted. Yet the quiet man stayed where he was, occasionally moving to avoid blocking others, always polite, always composed. A few people glanced at him from time to time, curiosity growing. One woman whispered to her companion that the man seemed oddly confident for someone being mocked. Another said nothing but watched him closely. The quiet man thought about leaving. Not because he felt unwelcome, but because he had already seen what he needed to see. Still, he stayed. He had learned long ago that walking away too soon often allowed false ideas to remain unchallenged. Patience, he believed, revealed truth better than anger ever could. The billionaire, meanwhile, continued to enjoy the spotlight. He spoke about his successes, his businesses, his influence. People listened closely, nodding at the right moments. Some asked questions, eager to impress him. He answered with confidence, occasionally adding another joke at someone else's expense. Each laugh fed his ego at one point. Someone mentioned a recent challenge related to a major project, something complex that required careful planning and deep understanding. The billionaire waved it off, saying it was under control, though his tone suggested otherwise. A brief look crossed his face, one of frustration quickly hidden. The quiet man overheard the conversation. His attention sharpened. He knew that problem well, not from books or theories, but from years of hands-on experience. He recognized the signs of someone underestimating the difficulty. Still, he said nothing. As the evening went on, the atmosphere began to change. The billionaire's confidence started to crack as questions became more detailed. He answered vaguely, shifting topics when pressed. Some people noticed. The laughter became less frequent, the admiration less certain. The quiet man moved closer, not pushing into the circle, just near enough to listen. He was still unnoticed by most, but a few people recognized him from earlier. They remembered the mockery, the silence, the calm response. Something about him now felt important, though they could not explain why. When a sudden issue arose, one that demanded immediate attention, the room tensed. The billionaire was asked to address it. He hesitated, buying time with jokes, but the problem did not disappear. It grew more urgent. Eyes turned toward him, expecting leadership. He struggled. His words faltered. The confidence that once filled the room now felt thin. Whispers spread. This was not the moment he had prepared for. In that moment, the quiet man took a small step forward. Not to interrupt, not to embarrass anyone, but simply to offer help. His voice was calm and respectful. He spoke softly, yet clearly. A few people turned toward him, surprised. The billionaire looked at him, confused, then annoyed. He almost laughed again, ready with another remark, but something stopped him. Perhaps it was the seriousness in the man's eyes, or the steady tone of his voice. For the first time that evening, the room was silent without being awkward. The quiet man did not explain who he was or why he knew what he knew. He only spoke about the issue itself, pointing out a detail others had missed. It was a small observation, but it was correct. A murmur ran through the crowd. The billionaire said nothing. He listened, his expression unreadable. Others leaned in, suddenly interested. The quiet man stopped speaking as soon as he finished his point. He did not push further. He waited. That single moment planted a seed of doubt in the minds of everyone present. The man they had dismissed might not be who they thought he was. The laughter from earlier felt distant now, replaced by curiosity and a growing sense that something important was about to unfold. And just like that, the balance of the room shifted, quietly, without force. Setting the stage for what was yet to come, the room had grown quieter, though not completely silent. People were still talking in small groups, but their words were measured, softer than before. The event continued, but the energy had shifted. Laughter that had once been easy now felt forced. The billionaire, who had dominated the room with his confidence, now found himself caught off guard. He had assumed he could control every interaction. But this quiet man had disrupted the rhythm without raising his voice or making a scene. The billionaire watched him, a mixture of irritation and curiosity crossing his face. He leaned toward one of his close associates and muttered something under his breath. The words were sharp, meant to ridicule, but they lacked the usual punch. He tried again, louder this time, questioning the quiet man's presence at the event. "How did he even get in here?" he said, his tone dripping with disbelief. A few people chuckled nervously, not wanting to seem rude, but their laughter was hesitant. The quiet man stood a few steps away, calm, composed, and completely unaffected. He did not move closer or retreat. He simply observed. The billionaire's words bounced off him like water off stone. Those who had witnessed the earlier interaction began to watch him more closely. There was something about his demeanor, his stillness, that drew attention without effort. People started to notice the contrast between the arrogant, loud billionaire and the quiet, composed man. The billionaire, sensing that his usual tactics were failing, decided to escalate. He spoke louder, addressing the quiet man directly this time. He asked pointed questions about his background, his profession, and his reason for being there. The questions were framed as jokes, but the underlying intention was to humiliate. He expected the quiet man to stumble, to reveal that he did not belong, to provide material for laughter. The quiet man, however, did not respond immediately. He considered his words carefully. He had faced mockery before and knew that reacting too quickly could feed the wrong narrative. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, polite, and steady. He answered only what was asked, nothing more, without hesitation. He did not try to impress, and he did not apologize for being there. His composure surprised the room. The billionaire's laughter faltered. He was not used to being met with calm confidence in the face of ridicule. He attempted another joke, mocking the quiet man's clothing and appearance, suggesting that he looked like someone who had wandered in from the street. The words landed differently this time. Some people laughed out of habit, some looked away, and others, who had been watching the quiet man closely, began to question their own assumptions. The quiet man remained silent after listening to the remarks. He did not respond with anger or defensiveness. His silence was not weakness. It was patience. He understood the power of presence. Sometimes saying nothing spoke louder than any words. The room began to feel a tension that was subtle but undeniable. Those who had been entertained by the billionaire's ridicule now felt a sense of discomfort. A few people whispered to each other, noticing the quiet man's demeanor. "He doesn't seem fazed," one said softly. "He's not angry, not defensive. He's just calm," said another. The word spread quietly among small groups, and the mood in the room began to shift. Curiosity replaced amusement. People started to wonder who he was and what experience had given him such confidence. Meanwhile, the billionaire grew increasingly impatient. His jokes and remarks became sharper, his tone edged with frustration. He wanted to provoke a reaction, to assert dominance, but every attempt was met with composure. The quiet man did not engage in petty arguments. He stood quietly, listening, observing, and responding only when necessary. At one point, the billionaire decided to challenge him directly. He asked a series of questions designed to expose ignorance or lack of knowledge. The quiet man answered each question carefully, with precision and clarity. His responses were not boastful. They were factual and calm. The answers revealed a depth of understanding that few had expected. Murmurs of surprise spread through the crowd. People who had assumed he was insignificant now felt a new sense of respect. Even if they did not fully understand why, the billionaire's expression changed. He was used to being the smartest person in the room, the one everyone listened to, the center of attention. Now, he found someone who could match him in knowledge and insight without arrogance. Someone who could answer questions with clarity and confidence. For the first time that evening, he felt a hint of uncertainty. The quiet man's presence began to influence others subtly. People who had laughed at him earlier now watched closely. Some felt embarrassed for having judged him. Others were curious about how he had acquired such knowledge and composure. His quiet strength began to ripple through the crowd, changing the dynamics in a way that no one could ignore. Despite the growing attention, the quiet man did not seek it. He did not move to the center, and he did not try to impress anyone. His actions were simple. He answered questions, offered insights, and remained composed. His humility made him even more compelling. People began to see that true strength did not always announce itself with loud words or flashy displays. As the evening progressed, a new problem arose within the event. Something required attention, a situation that needed careful thought and calm decision-making. The billionaire attempted to address it, but his confidence faltered. He spoke loudly, but his words lacked substance. The room sensed the tension. The problem was not severe yet, but it was clear that it needed a level of understanding that money alone could not provide. The quiet man stepped forward slightly. Not forcefully, just enough to show readiness. He offered a suggestion, a simple solution, grounded in logic and experience. The room paused. People listened, some skeptically, some with growing interest. His voice was steady, his words clear, and his approach was practical. There was no need for fanfare, no attempt to draw attention. The billionaire looked at him, his face a mix of disbelief and irritation. He expected dismissal or ignorance, not insight. The quiet man's suggestion was correct and well-reasoned. A few people nodded subtly, impressed. Others whispered among themselves, realizing that they had misjudged him earlier. The quiet man's calm intervention had shifted the perception of everyone present. The crowd began to see the quiet man differently. He was no longer invisible, no longer the subject of ridicule. He had demonstrated competence without arrogance, knowledge without boasting, and patience without weakness. People began to understand that appearances could be deceiving, and that judgment based on superficial observations often led to mistakes. The billionaire, sensing the shift, tried to regain control of the situation. He laughed, made another comment, but it fell flat. The room was no longer entertained by his words alone. Attention had shifted to the quiet man, and the mood was changing from amusement to curiosity and respect. The billionaire's usual dominance was being challenged in a subtle but undeniable way. The quiet man remained composed. He did not seek recognition or validation. He had no need to prove himself to anyone. His actions were deliberate, measured, and calm. People began to realize that his strength came from experience, patience, and humility, not from wealth or status. The contrast between him and the billionaire became even more apparent. Small conversations began to form around the quiet man. People who had initially judged him started asking questions, not to mock but to understand. They wanted to know how he had come to be so knowledgeable, so confident, and so composed. Some were curious about his past, his experiences, and the journey that had shaped him into someone who could stand silently and still command respect. The billionaire, now aware that he was losing the control he had once taken for granted, grew more tense. His usual tactics, mockery, humor, and dominance, no longer worked. He realized that his wealth and influence could not automatically command respect, especially when faced with someone who had skill, knowledge, and patience. The quiet man continued to observe, waiting for the right moment. He did not rush, did not force the issue. He understood that respect earned through calm action was far more powerful than any attempt to impress through words or status. People around him began to sense this truth, and the atmosphere in the room shifted even more. By the end of the evening, it was clear that the quiet man had changed the dynamics of the event. He had turned ridicule into curiosity, silence into attention, and calm presence into influence. The billionaire, who had once been the undisputed center of the room, now faced someone who could quietly match his knowledge and command attention in a different, more powerful way. People left the event with a new understanding. They had witnessed a subtle but powerful lesson. Appearances could deceive. True value often lay beneath the surface, in patience, knowledge, and humility. The quiet man had not only endured public mockery, but had also begun to reshape perceptions through his calm, steady presence. And as he finally stepped away from the crowd, he did so without fanfare, without seeking recognition, leaving behind a room that would remember him not for his clothes or his wealth, but for the quiet power of his character, patience, and intelligence. The atmosphere in the room had changed subtly, though many had yet to notice it consciously. What had once been light chatter mixed with laughter was now a careful, measured murmur. People moved with a slightly slower pace, glancing toward the quiet man from time to time. Something about him had captured attention, not just his calm in the face of ridicule, but the quiet assurance that seemed to radiate from him without effort. It was the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, yet compelled it. The billionaire, once the unquestioned center of energy in the room, now felt the shift. His laughter seemed less natural, his jokes more forced. He tried to regain control by drawing attention to his successes, recounting stories of ventures that had earned him admiration and wealth. The crowd listened politely, but the enthusiasm was diminished. People had begun to notice the quiet man, and without even realizing it, were comparing him to the billionaire. The contrast was stark. It was at this moment that a situation arose, one that the room could not ignore. A serious problem with the event's logistics became apparent. An important presentation that everyone had been anticipating faced a sudden technical failure. Screens flickered, microphones failed, and the organizers scrambled to find a solution. The billionaire, who had been attempting to maintain a lively atmosphere, was visibly unsettled. He barked orders, waved his hands, and tried to take charge. But the problem only grew more complicated under his efforts. People began to murmur anxiously. The event had been carefully planned, and now, despite all the planning, it teetered on the edge of chaos. Some guests whispered to each other, questioning whether it could be fixed. Others looked to the billionaire for leadership, expecting him to restore order. But he struggled. His confidence, once unshakable, wavered under the pressure. The quiet man observed everything, his mind analyzing the problem calmly and thoroughly. Unlike others, he did not feel the need to impress or assert dominance. He simply recognized what needed to be done. He noticed a small but crucial detail, a connection error in the system that had gone unnoticed by the organizers. It was something simple to fix, but would have been overlooked by anyone focused on appearances or haste. Without hesitation, he stepped forward. His movement was quiet, deliberate, and non-intrusive. He did not push through the crowd or demand attention. He simply approached the source of the problem. The organizers glanced at him, uncertain at first, unsure whether to allow him to intervene. He spoke politely, explaining what he had noticed. His voice was calm, even, and confident. There was no arrogance, only a clear understanding of what needed to be done. A few of the organizers, desperate and out of options, nodded. They allowed him to work. He moved with precision, checking the connections, testing equipment, activating equipment and quietly instructing a couple of staff members on what to do. It was a simple fix for someone who knew what to look for, yet it required focus, patience, and clarity. In minutes, the system was restored, the screens lit up, and the microphones functioned properly. The room exhaled collectively. Relief spread like a wave through the crowd. Guests who had been tense began to relax. Whispers of admiration circulated quietly. And some looked at the quiet man with newfound respect. The billionaire, who had been struggling, now stood to the side, his usual commanding presence diminished. He had assumed he could solve any problem with confidence alone. But this situation had revealed a gap in his understanding. People began to ask questions, softly at first, then more openly. "Who is he?" one whispered. "How did he know what to do?" said another. Guests who had laughed at him earlier now watched closely, realizing that their assumptions had been wrong. The quiet man's actions had not only solved the problem, but had also subtly shifted the balance of power in the room. The billionaire, sensing the change, tried to assert control again. He complimented the quiet man with a tone that was meant to be casual, but it lacked the usual dominance. "Well done," he said, forcing a smile. "I suppose that was helpful." It was an attempt to regain composure, but it fell short. The words acknowledged the quiet man's skill, yet they could not erase the shift in perception that had already occurred. The quiet man accepted the words politely but did not seek further praise. He returned to a corner of the room, continuing to observe rather than dominate. His humility made his actions even more impactful. People began to notice that true skill did not need loud words or attention-grabbing gestures. It could manifest quietly, efficiently, and effectively, leaving a lasting impression without fanfare. A few guests who had previously been dismissive approached him privately, asking questions about his experience. He answered with the same calm demeanor, sharing insights without boasting. He spoke of practical knowledge, patience, and problem-solving skills developed over years of experience. His words were simple, clear, and grounded in reality. People listened intently, realizing that his understanding came not from education alone, but from real-life challenges, discipline, and observation. The billionaire, meanwhile, struggled to maintain the same level of authority. He attempted to redirect attention by recounting more stories of his wealth and success, but the impact was diminished. Guests had seen firsthand that wealth and confidence did not always equate to competence. The quiet man had demonstrated a type of skill that was independent of status knowledge, insight, and the ability to act under pressure. As the event continued, small incidents arose that required quick thinking. Each time the quiet man offered subtle guidance or assistance. He never imposed, never corrected harshly, and never sought recognition. His contributions were practical, precise, and effective. People began to quietly admire him, realizing that his value was not measured by appearance, status, or volume, but by his ability to understand and act with clarity. By mid-evening, the room's energy had shifted completely. The billionaire was no longer the unchallenged center of attention. He remained influential, certainly, but the quiet man had introduced a new focal point. Guests moved between conversations differently, more aware of substance than spectacle. Laughter still occurred, but it was tempered by thought. Respect, once assumed by wealth and status alone, was now being earned through action and competence. Some individuals in the crowd who had mocked the quiet man earlier now felt a quiet embarrassment. They had laughed without reason, judged without knowledge, and assumed too quickly. The quiet man's calm intervention had exposed the flaw in their assumptions without confrontation. He had demonstrated that patience, observation, and action could shift perceptions far more effectively than argument or defense. The billionaire, aware that his dominance was being challenged, became more guarded. His jokes and remarks were calculated, less spontaneous. He attempted to maintain authority, but he could no longer rely on laughter alone to command respect. The quiet man's presence had introduced a new dynamic, one where competence, patience, and calm presence mattered as much as, if not more than, wealth and status. In the quiet man's calm observation, he noticed the subtle tensions, the shifting attention, and the change in perception. He did not take pride in it, did not celebrate it, but understood its significance. He had faced ridicule many times in life, and had learned that patience and measured action were far more powerful than confrontation. By remaining calm, he had allowed the truth of his abilities to speak for itself. The evening wore on, and the quiet man's reputation among the attendees grew silently. People approached him, asked for guidance, and sought advice. He offered his insights modestly, never asserting superiority. Guests realized that he possessed a rare combination: knowledge that was practical and immediately useful, humility that made him approachable, and confidence that was natural rather than forced. The billionaire, despite his discomfort, could not deny the impact the quiet man had made. He had underestimated him, dismissed him, and attempted to ridicule him. Yet here he was, solving problems, guiding others, and commanding respect without any need for display. The quiet man had demonstrated that influence could be achieved not through wealth, noise, or intimidation, but through skill, patience, and calm action. By the end of the night, the event concluded successfully. Guests left with a sense of admiration for the quiet man, many reflecting on the lessons they had learned without even realizing it. The billionaire, now more aware of the limits of wealth and influence, carried a quiet respect for someone he had initially mocked. He understood, perhaps for the first time, that true ability and character were not always visible on the surface. The quiet man, as he exited the event, did so without fanfare. He did not seek recognition, applause, or validation. His work had spoken for itself. The room had witnessed a subtle yet powerful shift in perception, and everyone present would carry that memory with them. Respect had been earned quietly, actions had spoken louder than words, and humility had made impact far more profound than arrogance ever could, even as he walked away into the night. The impression he left behind remained. People continued to talk about him, to recount the calm man who had solved problems, guided others, and shifted the balance of power simply by being himself. In a room full of wealth, status, and confidence, it was patience, knowledge, and humility that had captured the attention, respect, and admiration of all. The quiet man's presence continued to resonate throughout the room as the evening progressed. People who had once dismissed him now began to observe him with a mixture of curiosity and respect. Conversations that had been dominated by small talk and laughter now included subtle references to his calm, practical guidance earlier in the night. Even those who had laughed at him before could not deny the quiet competence he had demonstrated. It was becoming clear that he was someone who did not need to boast to make an impression. Someone whose skills spoke for themselves, the billionaire. Still recovering from the earlier disruption to his control over the room, now faced another challenge. A more complex issue had arisen, one that required careful judgment, deep insight, and immediate decision-making. It was a situation beyond the reach of his usual wealth-driven influence. He tried to handle it with confidence, offering solutions based on intuition and previous experiences, but the answers were incomplete. The problem required a level of detail and understanding that he lacked. The room felt the tension. Guests watched closely, sensing that this moment would reveal something important. People began to whisper quietly to one another, comparing what they had seen from the quiet man earlier to the billionaire's current struggles. There was a noticeable shift in energy. Respect and attention were no longer tied solely to status. They were now linked to skill, patience, and insight. The quiet man stepped forward again, not forcefully, but with calm determination. He had studied the situation carefully from the moment it began, observing every detail, every movement, every sign that could help identify a solution. He spoke clearly, outlining a step-by-step approach to address the issue. His voice was steady, composed, and measured, carrying authority without arrogance. People listened intently, realizing that his understanding went far deeper than anyone had initially imagined. The billionaire tried to interject, offering alternative ideas, but his suggestions lacked the same clarity and precision. He could see the crowd shifting their attention to the quiet man, their eyes following his every move, their reactions showing trust and admiration. For the first time, he felt the weight of underestimating someone he had mocked. The quiet man's calm, deliberate approach was solving problems that the billionaire could not manage with money or influence alone. A few organizers approached the quiet man, asking for clarification or confirmation. He guided them carefully, demonstrating solutions with patience and clarity. Each step he took was practical and logical, leaving no room for confusion. Guests began to nod in silent acknowledgement, impressed by the depth of knowledge and the simplicity with which he addressed a complex issue. It was not just the correctness of his actions, it was the way he executed them with humility and efficiency that earned admiration. People who had been skeptical earlier were now quietly observing, some even taking notes or mentally recording his methods. The quiet man's ability to act decisively under pressure, without seeking praise, left a strong impression. It became clear to everyone that influence and respect were not earned through appearance. Loudness or wealth, they were earned through competence, calmness, and character. The billionaire, sensing the attention slipping away from him, tried again to assert authority. He made jokes, raised his voice, and attempted to redirect focus to his past achievements. But the crowd was no longer responsive in the same way. The quiet man's presence had created a subtle but undeniable shift in perception. People were listening more closely to substance than spectacle, and the billionaire's influence seemed diminished in comparison. As the issue continued to unfold, the quiet man's insight proved critical. He identified a key point that others had overlooked, a detail so simple that it had gone unnoticed but so essential that without it the problem could not have been resolved. He explained it clearly, demonstrating the connection between the detail and the larger issue. The crowd followed his reasoning, and a wave of realization spread through the room. The problem was solved. Not through force, not through money, and not through status, but through observation, experience, and careful action. People around him reacted with quiet awe. The earlier laughter and mockery felt distant now, replaced by admiration and respect. They began to understand that the quiet man's strength was rooted in his knowledge, patience, and ability to act under pressure without seeking validation. The billionaire, now visibly humbled, approached him. There was a moment of hesitation, a recognition that words alone could not bridge the gap between assumption and reality. He acknowledged the quiet man's contribution with a tone that was measured, not dismissive, not boastful, but genuine. It was a rare moment where he had to admit that his earlier judgment had been wrong. The quiet man accepted the acknowledgement politely, without arrogance. Offering a simple nod of appreciation and returning to a corner of the room, maintaining his calm and composed demeanor, people continued to watch, learning a subtle but powerful lesson. They realized that humility and competence could create influence more lasting than wealth and status. The quiet man did not need to dominate conversations, boast about his achievements, or seek recognition. He had earned respect simply by acting with clarity, patience, and skill, showing that true value is often revealed through action rather than appearance. Several guests approached him afterward, some with questions, others with admiration. He spoke to each person with the same calm humility, offering guidance without pretension. They began to see the depth of his experience, recognizing that it came from years of hard work, careful observation, and a commitment to learning and growing. He had faced challenges before, and the skills he had developed allowed him to navigate the current situation effortlessly.